Many thanks for staying with us. Of course, we continue to unpack the first 2 weeks of the Trump administration, and the political climate in the United States has reached a critical point with new immigration enforcement policies targeting schools and churches, spaces traditionally considered off limits. Now, these actions have sent shockwaves through immigrant communities, forcing many into hiding and raising concerns about the erosion of democratic norms. At the same time, the U.S. is facing accusations of descending into chaos, with some likening its current governance to a quote-unquote banana republic. As questions about political motives, global repercussions, and the nation's future swirl, the world is watching closely. And joining us to discuss these pressing issues is Dr. Cedric McCay, a renowned political analyst based in the United States, and he joins us from Chicago this morning. Dr. McCay, a very good day to you, and thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Good morning. I'm so happy to be with you. Thank you for the introduction and the questions here.
I think it's almost unbelievable that it's only been 2 weeks since President Trump took office. I mean, 9 days, in fact. What do you make first and foremost of the first 9 days of the 47th President of the United States?
Well, it has been a torrent of executive orders, hasn't it? It feels certainly like it's been more than 2 weeks. In fact, we tend to give the first administration, we tend to give it its first 100 days before we make an assessment of how well they're doing. It feels like we've already passed the 100 days already. It just has been amazing, an onslaught. And I think that's the design of Donald Trump and his administration, to just sort of wear down Democratic opposition, both big D Democratic and small d Democratic opposition, to what really seems like a power grab and a reach for white authoritarianism and fascism. It's really stunning what we're seeing. We have seen presidents before use the executive order. This isn't new. We've seen it every time. A president will come in, that person will introduce their executive orders, and some of them would reverse executive orders that had been in place. We've never seen anything like this with a full onslaught, not only on policy, but attacking what seems to be constitutional protections. And so it's left people quite a bit dizzy, and the opposition are really scrambling to reorganize itself. So what we've seen in the country is a bit of a political mess. We're even having arguments with our neighbors and our friends. The United States of America needs Mexico and needs Canada the way fish need water. We need each other, but we're squabbling with them, not to mention our friends in other part of the region in South America. It's just been an onslaught, and it's left everyone a little unclear about which direction is forward.
I think you certainly echoes that last part of your comments. And when you look at Donald Trump as the 45th president of the United States, and you look at this version of Donald Trump as the 47th president of the United States, back then he was talking about making America great again, and this time around he's talking about America first. What do you make of these versions of Donald Trump here?
He's a hard person to figure out, so I'm going to take an aim at it, but it's not an easy thing to do. I think Donald Trump was humiliated in some ways by the rise of Barack Obama, and just didn't expect that Barack Obama would win and be such a triumphant president. We remember the 1.8 million people who were outside for his inauguration. Donald Trump hasn't seen anything like that. And I think there's a bit of jealousy in that 45th president to what he had seen from the Obama administration. But having been turned out of office and having been sent out and then impeached twice, tried before the public, found guilty and convicted of felonies, I think has emboldened him to be as brazen a political leader as one could imagine. There will be no third election for him unless the Constitution is changed. Some people have already begun to start talking about that sort of thing. So this is it for him. If he's going to do it, this will be his time to do it, and it will be now. And he has come both guns blazing. I think he's going to find out that the American democracy doesn't quite work this way, even if he is friends with the richest man in the world, even if the Republican Party in the party members in the Senate and in the House, even if they're afraid of a primary challenge, and his buddy, who has more money than God, they say, may fund their opponents. I don't think this is going to be the way forward. I think this is a political strategy that's doomed to fail, but it probably feels very good, and it probably feels like it's vindication for someone who felt as if he was being picked on.
The very foundation of America was always built on diversity. And you look at from the first discovery, of this land, this Northern America, from Native Americans, Native Indians residing there to 400 years of slavery. America has always been this pot of, diversity, so to say. When you look at some of these immigration laws and these executive orders that the Trump administration is currently pushing at right now, what do you make of it, and what does it say about America right now?
You raise a very good point, but I'll have to gently correct some of what you said. The reality has been an American continent full of diversity, with Native Americans being here, those coming from Europe, and then by force and by terror, people being dragged from the African continent, and some coming from being also dragged in a certain way from Asia. There has always been a robust diversity of the American populations. But that hasn't been the narrative. Our narrative has been this is a white country governed by God and operating in God's providence for the greater glory of whiteness, I guess, if you were to call it that way. And so we haven't really accepted as a full truth and fact that the country is not white only. And in fact, what you see from Donald Trump and his political fellows is really an effort to install what will be a system of white minority rule, how to govern when the white population is no longer in majority. There has always been a different complexion of the population other than European descendants and white, however we want to conceive and discuss that. There's always been a huge population of those people, sometimes in majority in some of the states. If you look at Mississippi and South Carolina, who often had populations that were predominantly African. You could have seen that in the past in a place like Rhode Island, and even in Delaware hundreds of years ago. But the narrative has been different from our reality. The narrative has suggested that this is a white country, that whites should govern, that only whites should be in power. And in fact, Donald Trump very cleverly has called on that narrative. And when he says, let's make America great again, he might have been saying, let's make America white again. And when he says America first, he really seems to be saying to some of his supporters, whites first. And so there's a sort of code language there and a doublespeak there that we wonder if it won't unravel, because some of the people being impacted the most harshest by his policies are his white voters who are poor and are relying upon government benefits and government support in order to sustain themselves. And some of them have gone onto social media crying and complaining, saying these executive orders have targeted them and they shouldn't have been the target. It should have been others, but not themselves. That's not quite how those things work. So we'll see if, and it may take us until the midterms before we find out if the voting population of this country is going to pull back and say, we don't like this approach. It's too costly. It's expensive even for Americans. It's ruining our relationships with our friends and neighbors, and it ain't taking us forward. But for now, in this torrent of executive orders, there seems to be a roaring support from some parts of this country to make America white again or great again, or whichever words they want to use, but it's to take us directly away from where the Democratic Party was headed, with an African-American vice president, an African-American president. They've nominated 2 women now to be candidates for president, to take us away from that direction and back toward a party of, I guess, one person. That would be Donald Trump.
Help us understand, the situation on the ground as far as, the federal courts, etc., are concerned. What is happening on the ground there, and is anybody challenging perhaps some of these executive orders? I was mentioning to my co-host earlier on in the program that, of course, even some of the legitimate avenues, for becoming an American citizen, for getting migration status, for instance, have also been scrapped. You look at the CBB-1 program, you look at the humanitarian parole program, you look at the refugee program, for instance. Those are currently all been ended here.
So yes, there has been a response, and the flip side of this, and for those of us who are quite interested in watching politics, it's fascinating to see the opposition sort of galvanize themselves and get organized and unified in a way that maybe they had not been if they weren't fighting a fellow like Donald Trump. So the courts are being used. Even Republican judges are striking some of this nonsense down, and some of it is nonsense. We elect presidents in the United States of America, not kings. You don't get to rule by edict. And so it might feel good. It may be a great political stunt. It might stage very well and you can use it for great commercials, but it's not going to carry the force of law because the judges are saying, you can't do this. This isn't going to work. And we've already seen several of the executive orders be rescinded or pulled back. Some have been put on pause by federal judges. Others have been called outright blatantly unconstitutional. It's just not going to happen. So we have seen a robust response by the Democratic Party, led by Representative Hakeem Jeffries from Brooklyn in New York City. They stayed pretty unified, and that's important to remember because in the Congress, I'm going to come to another point in a second, but in Congress, I think the lead is something like 219 to 216 for the Republicans. They can lose 2 votes, and then they've lost the majority. So they don't have a lot of room. In the Senate, I think they can have 3 votes. And so there isn't a lot of room. Donald Trump's victory wasn't a mandate. He had the 4th smallest victory in 60, 70 years. This wasn't a mandate. It's being heralded as such, but it really isn't. And as such, the opposition has galvanized themselves to take it to the courts, and there are judges, both Democrat and Republican judges, who said this isn't how we operate. You can't do this. And at the same time, it's awakening voters to see the impacts of what some of these policies are going to bring. So there is a latent but growing quickly, because it's only been a couple of weeks, movement to sort of respond to this. But it's pretty horrifying because we're seeing the planes take people back to their countries, sometimes taking them to third countries. We've seen the sort of bully effect. There was an issue with Colombia, who had refused military planes. They said, we're not going to let you bring these military planes into our country. We're not going to permit it. You can just send a regular plane, but we're not going to take military planes. They've turned the planes back. There was some jostling back and forth with the Trump administration. They did go back to regular planes and send people back. But it's a nightmare. People's parents and children and cousins and uncles are being snatched off the streets of America, sometimes right at the doors of churches and schools, being bundled away like some Gestapo force, and they're sent to God knows where. Thankfully, because of internet technology, you can usually find people when they get to another country, but it has emptied certain parts of American cities where there have been populations from Central and South America. The streets have gone empty. People, they don't want to be confused or captured or mistaken. It's a nightmare in lots of ways. And so the response has been to try to protect the population of these human beings, to try to defend our democracy against the rule of an authoritarian edict-giving president, and to try to remind even those in government of the robust nature of democratic discussion. We don't always have to agree, but we have to be in conversation and we have to be in partnership. So it's been stunning. It's been stunning, and I'm sitting here watching it. It's been stunning. We've seen federal aid for university students be shut down. Fortunately, that was rescinded. But imagine the chaos across the land. There were students who couldn't count on the federal support that many folks rely upon to go to school. I certainly did at both undergraduate and the graduate level, and it wasn't there. So it's we're all trying to respond. People are trying to take it day by day, but I think the response is growing stronger day by day. The strategies are getting more clever day by day. I think this sort of let's just dump these executive orders on people and create chaos is lessening in its effect. It's a lot of chaos. It's still dizzy, but I think people are growing in response to say, listen, let's get back to the normal order of business in a democratic federal republic, where you can have a party in power, you can have the opposition, and we can have some sort of exchange here, but we can't operate as if you're a president and that really is a king. That won't work.
Dr. McCay, always a pleasure. I wish we could, of course, discuss this all day long, but thank you so much for being with us this morning and sharing your insights on some of these developments. It's always appreciated, and we'll certainly continue to keep a close eye on the developments there.
It's moving very quickly, so I'd be very happy to come back and have a chance to chat with you again. Great. It's always a pleasure to be with you, and good morning, Namibia.
Thank you so much, Doc. There you have it, Dr. Cedric McCay joining us there from Chicago in the USA, of course, just unpacking some of those executive orders in the first 9 days of Donald Trump. Of course, the world is waiting with bated breath on which direction the US is heading. Of course, just touching on some of the executive orders pertaining to the immigration laws right now as well. We're seeing mass deportations from the US right now. And of course, the world is concerned. Do stay with us. Lotte is standing by with